what if Russia wins?
Oh my God, they might use a nuclear weapon. Once they do it, then it will be over.
They're going to use nuclear weapons near the NATO borders.
We would be totally foolish to believe that Russia is in any way a reliable negotiating partner.
What do you consider to be the most probable scenario of the development of this war?
We want Ukraine to win because it's in our interest.
Hi, my name is Alina Hrytsenko. I'm an international relations analyst, and this is Talking Substance. Today, we're going to be talking to General Ben Hodges, ex-commanding general of United States Army Europe, and we're going to be discussing Russia, current developments on the front line, further scenarios, and what if Russia wins. Please make sure to check this episode, like, and subscribe. General, welcome to Talking Substance. Thank you very much that you agreed to do an episode with us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
So let's go straight to the topic of today's discussion, which is obviously Russia. I have been noticing recently some contradicting narratives in the media. Some of them are quite disturbing, to put it mildly. Mostly, there is a narrative in the media that Ukraine is losing the war, that Russia is getting stronger and stronger, and there is also a possibility that Ukraine can lose this war this year already. And I'm not a military expert, but from what I am reading in the media, I'm doing my own open source intelligence, simple OSINT, so to speak. I can say that there's sort of a stalemate or deadlock on the front line. This is how we can describe the current situation. What is your assessment of the current developments of the front line? There is no big advancement, and it really seems that both armies are sort of stuck.
Well, of course, it is a very dangerous and difficult situation for Ukrainian armed forces on the front line, as well as for innocent Ukrainian civilians, as we just saw in Kyiv. But I would caution against people who are what I call doomers, that are so pessimistic that predicting the fall of Ukraine. Ukraine has been at war for more than 10 years. And more than 2 years, almost 2.5 years, since the beginning of the large-scale invasion, and yet Russia still controls less than 20% of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Half 500,000 Russian soldiers have been lost. Half or 1/3 of the Russian Black Sea Fleet is underwater, and so I think it's a bit premature to say that Ukraine could lose the war this year. No doubt there's a lot that needs to be done. Number one, the United States and our allies need to make it our strategic objective that Ukraine wins. That is because it's in our interest, not because of charity, but because it's in our interest that Russia is defeated. We need to make that clear. And if we do that, then all of the ridiculous restrictions and shortages of materials, that will be over because we make it a priority. Secondly, Ukraine, of course, has got to grow the size of the army. It is not easy to understand why, in a war of survival, Ukrainian government and the Rada are still not fixing the recruiting and growing the size of the army. I understand the reasons, but it's that's going to have to change. You've got to fix that this year to have enough troops. You've got enough people, you don't have enough soldiers. And then finally, I don't think that I think it's clear that Russia does not have the ability to knock Ukraine out of the war. The only thing they can do is continue to pound away at Ukrainian defenders, continue to murder innocent Ukrainian civilians, and hope that the West stops supporting Ukraine. That's their only hope. And I think that they are making decisions now that will really cause them problems after the end of 2025, economic decisions. So Russia cannot, I don't believe that time is necessarily on Russia's side.
Mm-hmm. There's also, it's not only a matter of troops, right? This is also a matter of equipment, a matter of weaponry, a matter of being able to strike legitimate aims on the Russian territory. I mean, like apart from oil refineries, Sweden has already allowed to do so with Swedish weaponry. Do you think it will ever be possible this year, potentially, that the Western countries and the United States as well can allow Ukraine to use the Western weaponry to strike some military targets on the Russian territory?
Yeah, of course. UK has also already approved it, and I think most nations actually would support it. It's the problem is the United States and Germany, and maybe the French. Although I think the French have been very well. Um, of course, Ukraine should be able to hit targets. This is, under the UN Charter, they can defend themselves. So this is a terrible policy decision on behalf of the U.S. administration. But that policy decision is an example of what happens when you don't have a clearly defined objective. If the only objective is really to avoid escalation, well, then you end up with stupid policies like this. So the key to victory here is for the United States to say, we want Ukraine to win because it's in our interest. And then those kinds of restrictions will be wiped out.
Yeah, so this is a matter of political will, but also there is the Western governments are being afraid of not underestimating Putin this time as well, as most of the countries did in 2022. So there is a fear that Putin might strike with the nuclear weapons as well, I believe, if you can agree with that. And Putin is ready to use Belarus as well as a potential, as a hostage, right? So they're trying to, as an instrument of intimidation. Putin was in Belarus last week, so this is also sort of an instrument to create some pressure on the Western countries that they're going to use nuclear weapons near the NATO borders.
Well, you don't have to go to Belarus to do that. I mean, that's a whole part of the information operation. They talk about they may put nuclear weapons in Belarus. Okay, you don't have to go to Belarus to threaten a NATO country. I mean, you can do that from Russian territory, but this is part of the deception, if you will, from the Russian side, because it makes it seem like, oh my God, they're getting closer. Russia has a border with Estonia already, and with Poland, and with Lithuania from Kaliningrad. So this is part of Russia's attempt to influence how we think. And so we self-deter because we believe, oh my God, they might use a nuclear weapon. Actually, there's a very, very small chance they would ever use a nuclear weapon because there's no benefit for them to use a nuclear weapon. The biggest benefit for Russia is the threat of the use of a nuclear weapon. Once they do it, then it will be over. The United States and other allies will deliver what President Biden called catastrophic consequences against Russia if they do it. So I think the Russians know that. And it would be very difficult for China to continue to support Russia if they used a nuclear weapon. So to me, there's no benefit for them to do it. And yet we continue to deter ourselves out of, I think, what is an unnecessary, exaggerated fear that Russia might do it, which means that Russia's information operations are working.
So that's absolutely logical and rational, but keeping in mind that the Russian leadership from time to time acts irrational. Is there any chance that they're going to use tactical nuclear weapons, perhaps in the Black Sea, just to demonstrate that they are serious and this is not a bluff?
Well, I think that actually the Russians are very rational. It may not be exactly a Western sort of logic, but I don't think these are not crazy people. They're evil, and they should pay an enormous price for the rest of history. But I would not just write it off and say, well, they're unpredictable. They're not rational. I think they're very rational, and I think they're very predictable. You can look at the history over the last 2 decades, but also over the last 3 or 4 centuries. It's very predictable. Yeah. Okay. So what if they use a tactical nuclear weapon in the Black Sea? And then what? I mean, again, my president has said, if you use a nuclear weapon, there will be catastrophic consequences. And so if Russia were to do that, there should be catastrophic consequences.
But wouldn't it be more difficult to retake Crimea, which is obviously retaking Crimea could be pivotal in this war. But as far as I understand, it's going to be a complicated offensive military operation, amphibious warfare with the support of air power. If the Russians use the nukes in the Black Sea, wouldn't it somehow wouldn't it mean that we will have to terminate the Crimean operation, which sounds, and to me, it seems like to me the biggest operation of the century.
You are mixing things. So that if whether or
Okay.
not Russia uses a tactical nuclear weapon somewhere in the Black Sea as a demonstration has nothing to do with whether or not Ukraine
Uh-huh.
continues operations against Crimea. I mean, the way you described it, that means that any Russian forces in the area would also have been destroyed or unable to operate, including the famous Kerch Bridge. So, uh, if you're suggesting that a tactical nuclear weapon, and by the way, that's the only nuclear weapon they would use. They would not use a strategic nuclear weapon
Yeah.
because that would elicit a
Yeah.
response from the United States directly against Russia. The use of a tactical nuclear weapon, in my view, would not. The United States would not reply with a nuclear weapon, but instead we have a lot of other capabilities that could be even more destructive of Russian forces inside Russian occupied Ukraine, or maybe some other Russian asset like their base down in Syria, something like that. I would not see us attacking a target inside Russia. There's no need to do that. And certainly, I would not see the United States attacking with a nuclear weapon. There's no need to do that. Now, Crimea, you're right, is the decisive terrain of this war. And I think it will take a while before Ukraine can fully liberate it and occupy it. But in the meanwhile, two things that Ukraine can do, and which I think Ukraine is doing, is to isolate it, to continue to threaten the Kerch Bridge. And eventually that bridge is going to go down. I don't doubt that. The time and the how will be up to the general staff or the Ukrainian leadership. The other thing that Ukraine is already doing is making Crimea unusable for Russian forces. The attacks on Sevastopol, on Saki, on Zhankoy, all of these things are forcing the Russians to have to relocate from those places so that the Navy and the Air Force and the logistics cannot operate from there. So that is an important part of this long process of making it untenable or unusable for Russian forces. And of course, that's the beauty of getting something like Storm Shadow or the ATACMS 300-kilometer range weapon, because you can strike with precision and destroy these places. And there's no place to hide in Crimea. I mean, the Ukrainians know exactly what Russia has where.
What do you consider to be the most probable scenario of the development of this war? Because it seems like in Kremlin they also understand that there is a deadlock on the front line. They are not capable of any further advancement on the front line. This is what they actually admitting. For example, when Putin was in Beijing recently, he gave an interview to a Chinese news agency, Xinhua, and he basically stated that we are ready for negotiations. The Global Peace Summit is coming soon in June. So do you think that this attempt of negotiating and freezing the conflict could be the most probable scenario of this war in the future, in the nearest future?
I really don't know. I think whenever Putin talks about negotiations, of course, all he cares about is getting time to rebuild, rearm, and repair damage. He has zero interest in any sort of real negotiated outcome. And we would be totally foolish to believe that Russia is in any way a reliable negotiating partner. So that. I think that you drew the right conclusion from his statement, because they do recognize that at least right now they cannot knock Ukraine out of the war. So the most improbable scenario would be something that happens in the next few months, which results in a total collapse of Ukrainian defenses, because I think Russia has only the ability to continue to try and overwhelm in different places along the line Ukrainian defenses, and they can only do that if we fail to provide enough ammunition, and if Ukraine fails to grow the size of the army. Otherwise, I don't see it as likely some kind of big collapse because
Hmm.
I just don't see Russia having that ability. What they do have, though, is the ability and willingness to continue destroying cities with civilian targets, and also to continue feeding their own unlucky soldiers into the meat grinder um, in an attempt to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses.
And what if Russia wins? I mean, freezing the conflict can also mean some sort of a victory for Russia. Of course, like it's not what they wanted at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, because the plan was to occupy the whole country. But even this less than 20% can also be considered a victory. But what if Russia wins? What's going to happen next? Because it's going to be a huge war in Europe again.
So the only way Russia wins is if the West fails and allows it to happen. That we don't help Ukraine. Um, Now, again, Ukraine has a huge responsibility here, and I keep mentioning this thing about growing the size of the
Hmm.
army. It's impossible for me to understand why Ukraine has still not taken the necessary legal steps and financial steps to grow the size of the army. That this should have happened 2 years ago. So this has got to be done, and you've got plenty of people, millions of women and men that are military age that could be in the military, but instead they're here in Germany or Poland or Romania or even in Ukraine, and they should be serving. So that's got to be fixed. But to get to the point of your question, um, if there is a total failure and Russia wins this war, then they have said what comes next. They have said that they will go to Moldova and other probably Baltic countries. And the Romanians have said that they will protect Moldova. I don't imagine that Poles will just sit behind the Vistula River and watch the Russians keep moving. I do imagine that Russia would force thousands of Ukrainian troops into the Russian army, that they would be absorbed against their will to be used as cannon fodder. And of course, there'll be millions of refugees from Ukraine heading into Poland and Germany. So it would be a terrible situation for Europe. NATO will end up being in the conflict. And of course, this is all totally avoidable. One other consequence of if let's say that Ukraine is forced to accept some kind of a settlement that is far less than ideal. I don't think that many investors will be interested in putting a lot of money into Ukraine to help with reconstruction if they see or sense that Ukraine will not be protected, will not be brought into NATO, and that the fighting could resume. Then I think this will have negative, and this will disincentivize big money investors from coming to help Ukraine.
Apart from supplying Ukraine with weaponry, what else can be done to stop Russia from further advancement? So if is perhaps there could be some negotiations with the Chinese, because as we understand, even this indirect assistance that they are providing Russia with is of very much help. They're still can develop their weaponry, they still can develop its production with those microchips and some technologies that the Chinese are supplying Russia with, although they're just not doing that for free. Of course, this is just simple business that they're doing, but still this is happening. So what else could potentially be done to restrain Russia?
I don't believe China's help is indirect. I mean, they are openly, brazenly helping.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, look, we haven't even tried yet. I mean, we have to be honest here. The United States and the West, especially Germany, France, and UK, yes, we've provided a lot of money's worth of equipment and ammunition, but we have not seriously tried. We haven't even declared that it's our objective for Ukraine to win. And that's step one. You have to, what is this game? We have to do that. Um, we have not used all of our economic tools. Russia is still able to export oil and gas somewhere. And by the way, oil and gas moving through pipelines across Ukraine into Europe. I don't understand that. So I mean, that Ukraine is allowing Russian gas to transit Ukraine, which gives money to Russia. And then you've got ships that are the so-called shadow fleet that are taking
Mhm.
oil from the Black Sea and through the Baltic Sea. Why haven't we stopped those? So I think if I sound frustrated, it's because I am, because we have not even tried to do all the things that we could do to isolate Russia, to cut off its ability to generate money, and to receive drones and ammunition and parts from Iran and North Korea and China. And of course, we can do more to help Ukraine grow the size of its army. I mean, it's not just about having troops, it's also about having the equipment necessary for the additional brigades that need to be created.
But it seems like it's not that easy anyway, because Russia is looking for alternatives. Russia is looking for some ways out. This is why they're using North Korea, for example, who is also a geopolitical international outcast, but they're still surviving. They're functioning. This regime is functioning. This is how they, so to speak, make friends and using each other for achieving their tactical ad hoc goals. There's also
The what you're highlighting is very important. This is not isolated. Russia's attack on Ukraine is a part of a much larger set of global challenges, and so the West should be when I say the West, I mean that includes our allies in Japan and South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, India, etc. Our allies and partners. You know, we should look at this as parts of a whole, and um, if you do that, then you think, okay, if we help Ukraine defeat Russia, that will isolate Iran, which will make it much more difficult for Iran to support the Hezbollah and the Hamas and the Houthis in the region. And then, of course, that would also isolate North Korea when they don't have Russia as an ally. And it would also send a very strong signal of deterrence to China. When China sees that the West together has the political will, the economic power, the industrial capacity, and the military capability to do all these things and still be able to deter China. So I think thinking strategically, the policy of defeat Russia first will have a positive effect on all those other things. But it will only happen if we use all of the elements of power, which is not just military, but also the economic tools, the diplomatic tools. And this requires, and I know I sound like a broken record, but this is basic strategic planning and thinking, is to identify that we want Ukraine to defeat Russia. If you don't do that, then you end up with a whole bunch of bad policies that are not connected to any desirable outcome.
So it all boils down to the political will. The reason that it has not been done already is only because of the lack of political will in certain countries.
Well, you keep avoiding. You're not saying what I'm saying. What I'm saying, yes, it's political will, but it's the will to clearly define the objective. That's the key. If you don't have an objective that says we want Ukraine to win this war, to defeat Russia, to knock them back to the 1991 borders, then you end up trying to find policies that are not attached to anything. We spent 20 years in Afghanistan and we only had a clear objective the first year. Then we spent the next 19 years coming up with policies that were not connected to an end state. And then it ends in a catastrophe, $2 trillion and thousands of people dead. So I think you could help inform your listeners by emphasizing the need for a clearly defined strategic objective.
Yeah, but with Ukraine, the strategic objective is to get back the borders, the 1991 borders. This is what the president of Ukraine proclaimed. But at the same time, it's impossible without the Western help, which includes not only weaponry, but economic pressure on Russia. And that has not been done to the full capacity. So that's why I'm asking that. The reason for that is the political will.
Well, you just repeated what I said.
Yeah.
It requires political will to say,
yes.
We want to defeat Russia. And yes, and so people still say, well, what is that? What does victory mean? President Zelensky said it 2 years ago. restore sovereignty of Ukraine's borders. That includes all of the 1991 borders. That means Russia is kicked out of all of it, including Crimea. And so to do that, it's going to take all those, the tools, the economic tools, the diplomatic tools, as well as military tools. It's going to take Ukraine growing its own military, as well as all of us working together to help bring that about. No, not one country can do it alone. Not the U.S., not Ukraine, not Germany. All of us working together.
But to defeat Russia, doesn't it mean that some internal processes inside of Russia, some internal turmoil can start, which can bring Russia to collapse? And this is also a reason for concern for the Western countries.
I think it's something we should plan for. Yes, it's a possibility, but we should not be afraid of it. We should not hesitate because we're worried that Putin might lose his job. I mean, that makes no sense. Look, the Soviet Union came apart, as you know, back at the end of the Cold War. Nobody predicted that, or not many people. I haven't met anybody that in 1988 said, "I think next year they're going to collapse." So, but nobody lost control of nuclear weapons. It was not chaos, but we were not prepared. This time we should be prepared. We should think about, okay, what might it look like if there is huge unrest inside Russia? The oligarchs realize that Putin has led them into a catastrophe, and there's a change. All right, I think that would be great news for everybody. And some people say, well, the next guy might be worse. It would be impossible to be worse than Vladimir Putin. And whoever is next will inherit a military that is shattered, an industry that is shattered, and an economy that's in terrible shape. So whoever's next will need to spend their first several years fixing what's inside Russia's own sovereign borders. So I think this is something that we should hope for, not be scared of, and if anything, we should try to accelerate it.
General, thank you very much for this valuable discussion. Thank you for your time.
Well, I'm grateful that you gave me the opportunity, Alina.
Thank you for being with us. Please share your perspective on what do you think, what if Russia wins? Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe not to miss the next episode.